Cowboy wanted a quiet bride, but the wild woman who arrived destroyed his expectations. Ethan McAllister sat on the porch of his small ranch, squinting at the endless stretch of golden prairie. The sun was warm on his shoulders, and a gentle breeze carried the smell of hay and wildflowers. He liked this quiet life, the soft sound of cattle in the distance, the occasional call of a hawk. It was peaceful. This ranch had been his father's, and before that, his grandfather's. It was simple, honest work, and Ethan had always dreamed of finding a woman who would share this calm world with him. He sighed and shook his head. He had tried visiting towns, meeting women at gatherings and dances, but nothing felt right. Most of them were too loud, too busy, too full of fancy talk. Ethan wanted someone who could enjoy a quiet morning with him, someone who could rise early, work hard, and sit quietly at night watching the stars. So, after thinking long and hard, he had done something he never thought he would. He had placed an ad in a small country magazine. Gentleman seeks quiet, kind-hearted woman to share life on a peaceful ranch. It was simple, honest, and careful, just like him. Weeks passed, and Ethan nearly forgot about the ad. The ranch work kept him busy, feeding the animals, mending fences, checking the water pumps, and tending the small vegetable garden near the barn. But one morning, a letter arrived, carried by a young courier who looked slightly out of breath. Letter for Mr. Gallen. Ethan McAllister, the boy said, handing over a thick envelope sealed with red wax. Ethan felt a small thrill. He opened the letter carefully. The handwriting was neat, flowing, and a little bold. Dear Mr. McAllister, I am ready to join you on your ranch. I am hardworking, cheerful, and excited to live a quiet life by your side. I hope to arrive soon and meet you in person. Yours truly, Lila Hart. Ethan's eyes scanned the letter again. Cheerful. Ha! Hardworking. Quiet life. It sounded perfect. He smiled, imagining the woman just as he had pictured, soft-spoken, gentle, and calm. He wrote back immediately, arranging for her to arrive in 2 weeks. The rest of that day, he walked the ranch with a light step, imagining the life they could have together. 2 weeks later, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. Ethan leaned against the porch railing, squinting. He expected a quiet, careful carriage, maybe with a polite horse trotting slowly, but what he saw made him blink. A woman rode a large, black horse straight toward the ranch at full speed, hair flying behind her, a wide grin on her face. She waved a hand at him as she approached, laughing loudly. The horse kicked up dirt and galloped straight through the small wooden gate. Ethan's jaw dropped. The woman pulled her horse to a stop right in front of him. She hopped down as if landing on the ground was the easiest thing in the world. Her boots were dusty, her hair wild, and her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Hello there," she called, brushing dust from her shoulders. "You must be Ethan. I'm Lila. I hope you don't mind me coming a little fast. I like to make an entrance." Ethan coughed. Welcome. Please, come inside." Inside, he offered her a chair by the small fireplace. Lila shook her head. "No, thank you. I like sitting on the floor, closer to the dog." She reached down and patted a large, sleepy brown dog lying nearby. The dog wagged its tail and gave her a soft bark. Ethan stared at her. This is not what I expected. Lila was energetic, bold, and completely unpredictable. She didn't seem quiet at all. Her laughter filled the small house like a wild song. "Tea?" he asked cautiously, trying to regain some control. "Perfect. Can I put honey in it?" "Oh, and do you have cinnamon?" "I love cinnamon." Lila's voice was cheerful, bouncing with energy. She moved around the kitchen, pulling jars and pans, humming loudly. Ethan poured the tea, still feeling unsure. He had imagined a quiet morning with soft conversation and gentle smiles. Instead, Lila was moving faster than he could follow, speaking louder than he could respond. But, for some strange reason, he felt a small smile tug at his lips. Over the next few days, Ethan realized just how different Lila was from his expectations. She rode the horses with wild skill, climbing over fences and laughing when she fell into hay. She explored the ranch from dawn until dusk, finding hidden wildflowers, climbing trees, and even coaxing a stubborn calf out of a muddy puddle with only her laughter. Ethan watched her, shaking his head. "She's something else," he muttered. One morning, he found her sitting on the roof of the barn, legs swinging, humming a tune. "Leela, get down from there. You could hurt yourself," he called. She looked down at him and grinned. "Don't worry, Ethan. I have a plan. Roofs are the best place to see the sunrise." Ethan groaned. "I wanted a quiet bride." "Quiet?" she repeated, laughing. "I don't even know what that means." And somehow, despite his protests, he felt a strange warmth in his chest. Lila wasn't just wild, she was clever. She found ways to make chores easier, though in unconventional ways. She built a simple pulley system to carry hay bales, rigged a clever water collection device from old barrels, and even tamed the mischievous goat that liked to escape every morning. One afternoon, they worked together to repair a broken fence. Ethan held the post steady while Lila hammered with surprising strength and precision. She sang a loud, cheerful song as she worked, and Ethan found himself humming along, even though he would never admit it. "You know," Lila said, leaning on her hammer, "I think this ranch has a lot of secrets. Like hidden springs, maybe?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Hidden springs? Yes. Water is always hiding somewhere. You just need to look." She smiled mischievously. "I'll find them." Despite himself, Ethan felt a spark of excitement. Maybe this ranch isn't as simple as I thought. Evenings were a new kind of adventure. Lila loved to sit by the fire, telling stories that made the dog bark and Ethan laugh. She told tales of faraway towns, wild storms she had survived, and clever tricks she had used to get out of trouble. "You really do have a wild side, don't you?" Ethan said one night as they watched the stars. "And you have a quiet side," Lila replied. "But I think it's time for some excitement, don't you?" Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe a little excitement isn't so bad." For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt his life changing. Lila's energy was like a bright wind blowing through the calm prairie, shaking things up. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he couldn't deny that he was curious. As Lila drifted off to sleep in her small, cozy room that night, Ethan sat by the porch, staring at the dark horizon. He thought about the quiet life he had imagined, and then about the laughter and energy filling his home. Maybe, he realized, the life he thought he wanted wasn't the life he needed. Lila's arrival had destroyed his expectations, yes, but somehow, in that chaos, something new was beginning. A new life, full of surprises, laughter, and possibilities. Ethan smiled softly, shaking his head. "Well, Lila Hart," he whispered to the wind, "let's see where this adventure takes us." And for the first time, he didn't mind that his quiet dream had been swept away. The morning sun spilled over the prairie in soft gold, and the ranch was alive with the gentle sounds of animals waking up. Ethan McAllister was already outside, checking the water troughs and feeding the chickens. He had grown used to Lila's presence in just a few days, though he still couldn't predict what she would do next. "Good morning, Ethan," Lila called from the top of the barn, her voice carrying in the open air. "Guess what I found?" Ethan looked up, squinting. Found what? I found the biggest nest of quail eggs in the orchard, and I think the mama bird won't mind if we collect just a few for breakfast. She climbed down with the energy of a spring breeze, dust from her boots scattering in all directions. Ethan groaned. Lila, we have to be careful with nature. We can't just take whatever we find. Lila waved a hand. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. He shook his head with a small smile. She really is something else. By mid-morning, the ranch was alive with activity, but not the quiet kind Ethan had imagined. Lila was everywhere at once. She rode the horses through the fields, tested new trails, and even challenged the stubborn mule, Rufus, to a race. Ethan followed behind, trying to maintain some sense of order. You'll have to slow down, Lila, Ethan called as she galloped ahead. Slow down? But I'm just getting started, she shouted back, laughing. You can't cage the wind, Ethan. Ethan sighed. Wind indeed. He had pictured a calm, gentle bride who would ride quietly beside him, not someone who treated the prairie like her personal playground. But even though he was frustrated, he couldn't help noticing how natural she looked on a horse, how free her movements were, how her laughter seemed to make the prairie itself sing. As the day went on, Lila proved she was not just wild, but clever too. She discovered a hidden spring near the back of the property, a small, crystal-clear pool tucked under a cluster of rocks. Look at this, Ethan. Isn't it perfect? She said, crouching to scoop up some water. We could use this for the animals when the river dries up in summer. Ethan bent down to inspect it. Well, that's actually quite useful. He couldn't hide the smile creeping onto his face. Lila's boldness often led to discoveries he might never have thought to look for. See? Lila said proudly. Being a little wild has its advantages. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. You certainly make life interesting. Lila's interesting quickly became a whirlwind of unexpected adventures. She found a way to fix a broken fence post, using an old wheel and rope, which not only held the fence, but made it stronger than before. She convinced Rufus, the mule, to carry supplies up a hill without complaining, using only gentle words and soft pats. Even the chickens seemed to recognize her, clucking happily as she moved among them. Ethan watched her at work and realized that despite all her chaos, she had a method to it. Lila was wild, yes, but she was also resourceful, smart, and full of energy. By afternoon, Lila had turned her attention to the small vegetable garden. Ethan had planted rows of corn and squash carefully in neat, straight lines. Lila crouched down, examining the soil, and then looked up with a mischievous grin. What if we mix things up a little? She asked. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Mix things up? Yes. Let's plant some flowers between the vegetables. Bees like flowers, and they help the crops grow. Plus, it'll look nice. It'll ruin the straight rows. Straight rows are boring, she said, laughing. And boring doesn't grow food. Look, follow me. She dug, planted, and laughed all the way, humming a cheerful tune. By the time she was done, the garden looked more like a colorful tapestry than orderly farmland. Ethan stared at it, torn between irritation and admiration. Somehow, her chaotic method seemed, right. That evening, Ethan prepared a simple dinner. Roasted vegetables, fresh eggs, and some bread. Lila, of course, had already tried to help, but somehow ended up spilling flour on herself and the dog. You really are a mess, Ethan said, trying not to laugh. And you are too serious, she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. Life is too short to worry about flour. Look, the dog doesn't mind. The dog barked once, as if in agreement. During dinner, Lila told stories of towns she had visited and people she had met. She described a daring ride through a sudden thunderstorm, a clever escape from a stubborn market bull, and how she had once convinced a group of children to help her build a small treehouse. Ethan listened, fascinated despite himself. "You've had quite the adventures," he said carefully. Lila grinned. "And I'm just getting started. This ranch is full of possibilities." Ethan thought about that. Possibilities. That's a good word for her. She wasn't just shaking up his expectations. She was opening doors he hadn't even noticed. A few days later, Lila suggested they go on a small ride beyond the ranch's borders. Ethan hesitated. He usually preferred familiar paths and safe trails. But something about her energy made him curious. "Just a short ride," Lila said, patting the black horse she had grown fond of. "Come on, Ethan. You'll see things you've never noticed before." He mounted his horse reluctantly, and they set off together. The prairie stretched endlessly, golden grass waving in the wind. Lila pointed out wildflowers, hidden burrows, and even a distant herd of deer grazing quietly. "See?" she said. "Life is all around us. You just have to look." Ethan nodded slowly, feeling a sense of wonder he hadn't experienced in years. She had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary. Back at the ranch, the day ended with a quiet moment by the fire. Ethan had expected silence, but Lila's energy had rubbed off on him. He found himself smiling at her stories, laughing at her antics, and even humming along with her songs. "You know," he said carefully, "I thought I wanted someone quiet. And now?" Lila asked, leaning back on her elbows, looking up at the stars. "Now, I'm not so sure." Ethan's lips twitched. "You certainly keep life lively." Lila laughed, a bright, warm sound that made the shadows of the fire dance. "Lively is better than quiet any day." Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and excitement. He had imagined a calm, predictable life, but perhaps that life had been missing something. Lila's presence was chaotic, yes, but it was also full of joy, creativity, and life. That night, Ethan lay awake for a long time, listening to the distant sounds of the prairie. The wind whispered through the grass, the owl called from a nearby tree, and somewhere far off, a coyote howled. And through it all, he could hear Lila humming softly in the other room. He realized something important. Life wasn't about controlling every detail. It was about enjoying the moments, embracing surprises, and discovering joy in unexpected places. And maybe, just maybe, he had found someone who could teach him all of that. As sleep finally claimed him, Ethan smiled, thinking about tomorrow. With Lila around, he knew the day would be full of laughter, discoveries, and, most importantly, life beyond the quiet he had once desired. For the first time, Ethan felt ready to let go of his careful expectations and embrace the wild, wonderful adventure that Lila Hart had brought to his doorstep. The morning sun rose slowly over the prairie, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. Ethan McAllister stepped outside, stretching his arms and taking in the crisp air. The ranch was alive with movement. The chickens clucked as they pecked at the ground. The cows stirred in the pastures, and Lila was already at work, humming a bright tune as she examined the garden. Ethan shook his head with a small smile. "I don't know how you have so much energy so early," he muttered, watching her crouch to check the soil. Lila looked up and grinned. "Energy is my middle name." "Well, actually, it isn't, but it should be." She laughed, brushing dirt from her hands. "Come on, Ethan. We have work to do before the sun gets too high." Ethan sighed. In his mind, mornings were for quiet reflection, for simple chores done slowly and carefully. But with Lila around, There was no slow. There was no careful. There was only action, laughter, and the unexpected. The day began with a project that Ethan had been dreading, fixing the old water wheel at the edge of the ranch. It had been broken for months, and Ethan had been putting off the repair because it seemed too complicated. But Lila, ever curious, had already examined the wheel and declared, "We can fix this. And I have a few ideas to make it even better." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Better? How could broken be better?" "You'll see," Lila said, flashing a mischievous grin. They climbed down to the creek together. The wheel creaked and groaned with every turn, clearly in need of repair. Ethan had already prepared the tools, but Lila immediately began pulling old ropes, examining the wooden paddles, and sketching a small plan in the dirt with a stick. "You know," Ethan said carefully, "I usually like to plan every step before touching the wheel." Lila laughed. "Planning is fine, but sometimes you have to feel the problem first. Let's try it my way." She worked with surprising skill, tying ropes and adjusting the paddles. Ethan watched, amazed. Her movements were chaotic to him, hands flying, feet stepping in different directions, but somehow every action had a purpose. By noon, the water wheel creaked less and spun more smoothly. Water flowed steadily into the troughs, ready for the animals. "Not bad," Ethan admitted, smiling. "Better than I imagined." Lila winked. "See? A little chaos goes a long way." After the water wheel, Lila insisted on helping with the fields. Ethan had rows of vegetables planted with precision, every plant in perfect order. Lila crouched beside the soil, examining the rows and then shaking her head. "You know, we could plant some flowers here and there. Bees like them, and they'll help the crops grow faster. Plus, it'll make everything look brighter." Ethan frowned. "Flowers in the middle of the vegetables? It will ruin the straight lines." "And straight lines are boring," Lila said cheerfully. "Life is more fun when it surprises you." Reluctantly, Ethan followed her suggestions. They dug small patches, planting bright marigolds, sunflowers, and daisies among the vegetables. By the afternoon, the garden looked like a colorful puzzle, strange but beautiful. Ethan had to admit, it did bring a new energy to the land. "You're changing the ranch," Ethan said quietly. "I'm just adding a little life," Lila replied with a grin. "You'll thank me when the bees come buzzing around." The afternoon brought another adventure. Lila had discovered an old barn at the far edge of the property, partly hidden by trees. Its roof had holes, and the wood had begun to rot. Most people would have ignored it, but Lila saw potential. "Ethan, we can fix this barn and make it useful. Maybe for storage, maybe for animals, or even a workshop," she exclaimed. Ethan hesitated. "That's a big job. I usually take my time with repairs like this." "Big jobs are more fun when you do them together," Lila said. "Come on, I'll show you how." Together they carried beams, patched holes, and swept out the dust. Lila laughed when a bird flew out of the rafters, and Ethan found himself laughing too, despite the mess and chaos. By the end of the day, the barn wasn't perfect, but it was solid, useful, and full of life. "Not bad," Ethan said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I never thought this barn could look so lively." "See," Lila said, brushing her hands together, "a little energy goes a long way." Evenings on the ranch were a new kind of peace for Ethan. He had once thought quiet meant stillness, but with Lila, evenings were lively in a different way. They would sit by the fire, the dog curled at their feet, and talk about the day. Lila loved to tell stories of her travels, of towns she had visited, people she had met, and clever tricks she'd used to solve problems. You really are full of surprises, Ethan said one night as they shared a simple dinner of roasted vegetables and eggs. And you're full of patience, Lila replied with a grin. I couldn't do all this without you. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest. Her energy, her chaos. It wasn't just entertaining, it was inspiring. It made him see possibilities he had never noticed before. One morning, Lila suggested they take a ride beyond the ranch, into the hills, where Ethan had never gone. He hesitated. He preferred familiar paths, but her excitement was contagious. You'll love it. I promise, she said, patting her horse. Adventure awaits. They rode through tall grass and hidden paths, discovering wildflowers, small streams, and a quiet grove of trees. Lila pointed out hidden tracks of animals, wild berries, and even a small family of rabbits hopping across the meadow. Life is everywhere, Ethan, she said.
You just have to open your eyes. He nodded slowly, feeling a new sense of wonder. For so long he had focused on routines and order.
Now he saw the beauty and unpredictability in the small surprises of the world. Lila wasn't just chaotic. She was alive, and she made him feel alive too. Back at the ranch, Lila began teaching Ethan a few tricks. She showed him how to coax stubborn animals with gentle words, how to find hidden water sources, and how to improvise when tools or supplies were missing. Every lesson was accompanied by laughter, playful teasing, and occasional chaos. You're learning, she said one day, watching Ethan carefully guide Rufus the mule over a tricky path. You're not so serious all the time anymore. Ethan chuckled. I'm still serious when it counts. Sure, Lila said, winking. But it's nice to see you loosen up a little. He realized she was right. He felt lighter, happier, and more open to life than he had in years. Lila had a way of shaking his routines without destroying them. She enhanced his world, made it bigger, brighter, and more exciting. That night, as the stars filled the sky, Ethan and Lila sat together on the porch, sharing a quiet moment. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, golden in the moonlight. The wind whispered through the grass, and the dog lay curled at their feet. You know, Ethan said softly, I thought I wanted a quiet life, but now I'm not so sure. Quiet? Lila repeated, laughing. I think you've discovered something better. Life is louder, more colorful, more fun when you let it in. Ethan smiled. You're right. I don't think I've ever felt this alive. And we're just getting started, Lila said, her eyes sparkling. Ethan leaned back, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known he was missing. Lila's wildness, her energy, and her laughter had changed everything, and he knew there was no going back to the life he had imagined. And for the first time, he didn't want to. He realized something important. Life wasn't about control, rules, or quiet routines. Life was about embracing surprises, sharing laughter, and discovering joy in unexpected places. And with Lila Hart by his side, every day promised a new adventure, a new lesson, and a new reason to smile. As he watched Lila climb onto her horse for one last sunset ride, Ethan felt a thrill of anticipation. Tomorrow would bring more chaos, more laughter, and more discoveries. And he couldn't wait. For the first time, Ethan understood that sometimes the best lessons in life come from chaos, and sometimes chaos comes in the form of a wild, wonderful woman who changes everything you thought you knew. The sun shone brightly over the prairie, and Ethan McAllister felt a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. Today was the day of the annual county festival in the nearby town, an event he usually attended quietly. It was full of friendly neighbors, local contests, and gossip. But this year, Lila had insisted on coming along. Ethan had tried to explain that the festival was small and orderly, but Lila had waved her hand and said, "Trust me, Ethan, this is going to be fun." As they rode into town, Ethan felt every eye on them. He had expected polite nods, maybe a few smiles, but Lila had ridden in on the black horse like a whirlwind. Her hair was wild in the wind, and she laughed loudly, waving to the children playing by the fountain. "Ethan, look at that," she said, pointing to a small stall of brightly colored ribbons. "Let's see what we can make." Ethan groaned softly. "I just wanted a quiet afternoon." "You don't have quiet days," Lila said with a wink. "You have adventures. Come on!" The festival was in full swing when they arrived. There were horses, livestock contests, food stalls, and music. Ethan tried to stay calm, guiding the black horse through the crowds. But Lila had already leapt down, waving to everyone with an energy that made the children cheer. "Hi there!" she called to a young girl holding a basket of apples. "Do you need help carrying those? Or maybe I can teach you a trick to balance them on your head." Ethan felt his face heat up. "Lila, maybe." "Too late," she said, balancing an apple expertly on her head and spinning around in a little dance. The children clapped and laughed. Even Ethan had to smile, despite his embarrassment. Lila was showing everyone her wild, confident self, and the town was captivated. People whispered, "Who is she?" and "What a lively woman." Ethan realized quickly that Lila had a way of drawing attention without even trying. Soon, Lila spotted a contest for animal tricks. A few horses and goats performed small stunts, and a small crowd had gathered. She turned to Ethan with sparkling eyes. "Ethan, we have to enter." "I think Rufus could win." Rufus, the stubborn mule, looked at Ethan as if asking, "Why are you listening to her?" "Lila," Ethan began cautiously. "Come on, you'll see. He's perfect for this." With careful coaxing from both of them, Rufus managed to perform a simple trick, stepping over a small wooden pole. Lila clapped and laughed so loudly that the crowd joined in. By the end of the day, Rufus had won a small ribbon, and the children were begging Lila to show them more tricks. Ethan had to admit she had turned a dull contest into a joyful spectacle. Next came the food stalls. Ethan had planned to quietly sample some bread and cheese, but Lila had other ideas. She bought a pile of sticky caramel apples and started sharing them with anyone nearby. She chatted, joked, and laughed, drawing a small crowd around her. Ethan shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "She's extraordinary," he muttered. "And she's mine," Lila said, hearing him and giving a mischievous wink. And now everyone knows it. Ethan couldn't help but feel proud. Despite all her chaos, she had a way of spreading joy. People admired her confidence, her boldness, and her energy. She wasn't destroying his world. She was showing him that the world could be brighter and more fun than he had imagined. By late afternoon, Lila had made several friends among the festival goers. Children ran alongside her, trying to learn tricks from Rufus, and adults laughed at her quick wit. Ethan watched her, realizing he had been wrong to wish for a quiet bride. She wasn't a disruption. She was an inspiration. Her wildness wasn't a problem. It was a gift. She had the courage to live freely, to explore, and to embrace every moment. And he had the privilege of seeing it all up close. Lila leaned on Ethan's arm as they walked back toward the stables. "See, Ethan? Life is more fun when you break the mold." Ethan smiled, feeling the truth in her words. "You're right. I think I'm finally starting to understand that." That evening, as they rode back to the ranch, Ethan noticed the prairie looked different. The golden fields shimmered with a new light, as if Lila's energy had painted the land with excitement. He realized she had changed not just his life, but his perspective. Back at the ranch, they sat on the porch, tired but happy. The dog lay sprawled across Lila's feet, and the stars began to twinkle above them. You know, Ethan said softly, I used to think I needed a quiet life, a quiet partner, someone who would fit neatly into my plans. And now? Lila asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. Now I don't want quiet. I want this. I want adventure, laughter, and surprises. I want you, he admitted. Lila's grin widened. Good, because I'm just getting started. The following weeks brought more changes to the ranch. Lila suggested new ways to plant crops, introduced playful training exercises for the animals, and even organized small games for local children who visited. The ranch became a hub of joy, laughter, and learning. Ethan noticed something remarkable. He had always been careful, methodical, and focused on routines. Lila's influence didn't erase his habits, it enhanced them. His careful planning, combined with her creativity and energy, made the ranch more productive, more beautiful, and more alive. One morning, they discovered a patch of wild berries along the creek. Lila laughed as she handed Ethan a handful. See, sometimes the best things come when you wander a little off your path. Ethan tasted the berries, sweetness bursting in his mouth. He nodded. You're right. I've been too focused on order. I need a little wandering. Lila smiled, pleased. And I'll be your guide. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between Ethan and Lila grew stronger. They learned from each other. Ethan taught Lila patience and careful work, while Lila taught Ethan spontaneity and joy in the unexpected. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the hill behind the ranch, Ethan reflected on how far he had come. He had wanted a quiet bride, someone to share a predictable life. Instead, he had found a wild woman who had turned his world upside down, and he was happier than he had ever been. You've changed me, he admitted quietly, watching her hair glow in the sunlight. And you've changed me too, Lila replied, leaning against him. I've learned to slow down, to appreciate simple moments. You've taught me that even chaos can have order. Ethan smiled. Then I guess we make a good team. The best team, Lila said, her voice warm and confident. That night, the prairie was calm, but the ranch hummed with life. Ethan realized that happiness didn't come from quiet, predictable routines. It came from connection, from laughter, from sharing adventures with someone who challenged you, inspired you, and made life brighter. And in Lila, he had found all of that, and more. She was wild, unpredictable, and full of energy.